Great stuff. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you, Wayne. Thanks very much. And morning to everyone that has joined us. Welcome to the first IRFA webinar for the year. For those that do not know me, I'm Geraldine Fowler, the President for the Institute of Retirement Funds Africa. And I'm joined today by our IRFA Vice President and EXCO member, Amanda Khoza, Head and Chair of our Legal and Technical Committee and also EXCO member, Nancy Andrews, and by our EXCO member and IRFA Executive Officer, Wayne Giller van Rensburg. So today's session is going to be an information session. It is the first of regular sessions such as this that the IRFA will hold during the course of 2025, deviate slightly from our normal webinars in, as I say, it is a more of an information and an update session opposed to a very technical and educational session. So it is also open not just to IRFA members, but to anyone out there, and these will be free update sessions that we will have from time to time. Today, we're going to provide an update on some of the most significant regulatory changes that took place in 2024, and I think it would be no secret to anyone as to what we will cover there, our famous two-pot, and we will then also look at some of the regulatory changes that will take place during the course of this year. It is not an all-inclusive session. We're going to focus on some very specifics that will come up. There will be, as we know, there are many regulatory changes that will come up in the next few years. Some of them we will cover today, others such as auto-enrollment and so forth, we will look at later on in the year. So I am going to, without any further ado, hand over to Nancy Andrews to kick off our session. Thanks, Nancy. Over to you.
Good morning, everybody. I hope you're all well. Thank you for joining us this morning. Yes, I think we ended off last year on a high, extremely busy and braving through the challenges of two-pot and all the additional work that needed to be done. But it was, we must say, it was a very successful year for most people in our industry. And what a milestone it has been for the retirement fund industry. I think we've come out of that first phase of two-pot where everybody was so anxious to actually get things done and make sure that members can withdraw their money from their savings components. And in just less than a week, we're back onto the second phase, the second withdrawals from the savings component. So it's another challenge that administrators and funds are going to face in terms of actually trying to meet the requirements for these members. I think what we wanted to cover today specifically is some of the issues that have come through and we've discussed last year with the FSCA and with National Treasury and SARS, given particularly that so many things needed to change and this industry is still adapting to everything and they're still struggling to actually come to terms with all the changes that came in such a short space of time. And one of the big things is the Section 14 transfers. Obviously, the FSA issued new documentation for the Section 14 transfers. And again, they, to create the efficiencies for and to not to wait too long in terms of getting it regulated, they found a way to actually create a notice and gave us the forms in the notice. So if you know the conduct standard, it had all the forms. Now it's actually moved out of the conduct standard and it's in this retirement fund notice. And what you would have seen is that it's changed. So there's compulsory fields that have to actually be completed. And I think the most important thing is that what we've all been used to over the years on a Section 14 is that we always put the value or the asset value that was transferring as at the date of the effective date of transfer. What the FSCA has come back and actually asked us to now do and has put this out in the industry, they want to see what the effective date, how the components are actually split and the values of each component as at the date of which you're signing the documents or you're submitting to the FSCA. So I think that's important. A lot of Section 14s that are subject to the approval of the FSCA seems to be spiking. It actually seems to be lots of queries seem to be spiking, particularly because transfer of funds are not actually kind of showing the split between the vested, the savings, and the retirement component. And this is now the requirement from the FSCA. A lot of people actually said we always used to actually do it at the effective date, and the FSCA has come back and said, well, we want it at current, we don't want it at the effective date. So you will see this kind of creating consequences for retirement funds, particularly because there's queries going to and fro regarding this particular issue. But I think the FSCA has made it very clear what they want. So all we're saying is that kind of look. If you're not sure, you can send an email to the IRFA, to Wayne at the IRFA, our CEO, or you can actually ask the FSCA because they're very, and they're always helpful and they always want to actually give you the directions you need. So just remember this for Section 14. And then the next one, Wayne, if we can move on to the next slide. So yes, it being 1 March on Saturday this week, I think administrators are actually going to feel the wrath again because there's so many people that are going to actually be wanting a second bite of the cherry. But we're faced with another big issue, and that is the budget. Obviously, last week on the 19th, the budget was meant to be announced. It didn't actually go through. It was postponed. It's going to, the effective date of the budget is now the 12th of March when the minister will deliver his speech. But if you actually had an opportunity to read his speech that was in the media or that was published, you would see that there was a distinct message that there was definitely going to actually be an increase in the individual tax tables, which, probably kind of punishing the wealthier, from the tax brackets perspective, which has a direct impact on saving withdrawal claims, because obviously on saving withdrawal claims, we're applying the marginal tax rate and we're using the PAYE to pay, we're applying marginal tax rates and paying PAYE. So those tables actually have a huge impact on how we make this decision or how we apply for the tax directive. What has happened is that we actually engaged with SARS early this week, to ask SARS what is going to happen, what are you going to apply if saving withdrawal claims are actually processed during this 12 days of March, what tax tables are you going to apply? And they said that the tax tables they're going to apply are the ones that are currently in play. And if we do that, what will happen is that there could actually be an underpayment of tax or an overpayment of tax for a member, and you'd only get to know this on assessment. If you recall last year, one particular issue that came up is that members were actually putting in, because the field of taxable income was not a mandatory field, it needed to be there. The requirement was to put in an amount, and if you didn't know what your taxable income is or your remuneration was, you just put in 0. Those members are already sitting with on assessment with problems because they're going to actually have a debt owing to SARS, which could actually impact this year's withdrawals. What we're trying to do as the IRFA is kind of engage in SARS to actually get to understand what they're going to apply, Now that we know they're going to apply the tables as is, it's time that funds decided what they want to do. Do you want to communicate to members that are going to make withdrawals and say, look, if we can process the withdrawal, but there is a possibility, and I think it's the right thing to do. There's a possibility that you may be overtaxed, or there may be a shortfall, and you're going to owe SARS money on assessment, which then means that on your next withdrawal, we can't actually pay out another savings withdrawal benefit if you owe SARS money. I think the important thing is that we need to decide as the retirement fund industry, or funds need to decide on their own. Are they going to process during this first 12 days of March, or are they going to actually, wait for the new tax tables? Because again, on the 12th of March, when the budget is released, those tax tables are effective from 1 March. So I think it's a big thing that we need to actually consider. I guess it's dependent on funds, but at the end of the day, we've got to think about members, because that's who we represent as well. And you wouldn't want a member to be sitting with a debt owing to SARS on assessment, because one, SARS is not going to get that money. Two, everything else he has is going to be impacted by it. So I think that we need to be very careful about it, and we need to actually kind of decide what we're going to do. But I think that we've taken the positive step. We've engaged with SARS. We've got an answer, and we've given you that answer. It's left up to you and your service providers or the funds that you work for to make a decision how you want to treat this. You can move on, Wayne. So what we actually, with the budget on the 12th, and we expected this 2025 Revenue Laws Amendment Bill to be tabled on the 19th of March when budget was going to be released. Obviously, there's a slight delay because budget was delayed. So we can expect on the 12th of March, the 2025 Revenue Laws Bill to actually be tabled once the budget is released. Again, this particular bill, the Revenue Laws Bill, was kind of actually is intended to actually kind of clarify some of the smaller issues that haven't actually been clarified in the previous versions of the bill, and like the one being the seeding date for over 55 members on provident funds and provident preservation funds. One, through consultation with National Treasury, they were very they heard the pleas from the industry that the calculation date for these over 55 members are subject to what is in the rules and what has been approved in the rules. So some funds actually have their rules approved. They will calculate on the last day of the month in which the member makes an election, subject to the 12-month period. Others says on the 31st of August, subject to the 12-month period. So there was differences within the way rules were actually approved, and they created the flexibility and allowed for it. What then happened? What they actually forgot to do is include the preservation funds, and they're now actually looking at that. And there was other like kind of small little I don't want to say typos, but like technical corrections that needed to be made. Obviously, the reference to 37D and the references to the cross references to the Income Tax Act needed to actually be amended and received and corrected in the bill, and they've put all of that in place. We did have a consultation session with National Treasury last week on Monday. Again, very positive, lots of collaboration, great stuff for the industry, because you can see that National Treasury is listening and hearing not only us, but together with what comes out of the FSCA and SARS, it seems to be working well. So we should see this next week on the 12th. So Wayne, I think I have like 2 minutes, right? I'm done. Okay, this was one of the requirements that we actually put, one of the requests that we made to National Treasury, because the current legislation actually allows you to transfer to multiple funds. The previous legislation allowed us to actually transfer to multiple funds, in the current version of the Revenue Laws Bill, it's restricted to one fund. And all we said is that the right to actually transfer to multiple funds was a vested right. You need to actually bring that back in because you always said that vested rights are going to be protected. And so this is also on as part of the submissions we made on the Revenue Laws Bill. So again, I think our regulator, the FSCA, SARS, our National Treasury, the policymakers are all actually looking at the retirement funds in a broader, as a holistic picture. And I think that's great because one of the things some of the things that they're looking at is that if you remember a few years ago, we were all said that if you're doing a Section 14 transfer, every member that is transferring, you've got to apply for the tax directive. What we heard, there's some discussions between National Treasury and SARS and the FSCA around this particular issue and whether this would be a requirement going forward. We're hoping that in this year's tax bill, we're not going to see it, and that section of the Act is going to be deleted. But I mean, that was something that they alluded to in the consultation session. So as and when we get updates on it, we'll feed back into the industry from an IRFA perspective so that everybody's kept up to date. The other thing they're looking at is the de minimis provisions. And we made kind of submissions through Annexure C, which is used for the budget, for some of them that haven't changed in a while to be changed. The feedback we actually got is that they're looking at all the de minimis provisions. Particularly, a comment that was made is that on the savings withdrawal, if you actually resign and you've taken a savings withdrawal in the same year, you're currently restricted to the fact that you can only have another withdrawal if your balance in your savings component is 2,000 days. And what they're looking at is whether or not that 2,000 amount should be removed, and whatever's in your balance, you can actually get it out. We've got to wait and see what's happening. They're also looking at de minimis in terms of retirement component. So they're trying to kind of align to see what's feasible, create efficiencies for the industry. So we're not sitting like funds are not sitting with little pots of money that we can't do anything with because it's just getting eaten up with fees that we have to actually deduct from a fund to actually maintain the record. So I think that watch the space. It's going to be it's an exciting time for all of us. We did see that in the budget speech, in the minister's budget speech, he did say the second phase of retirement, the second phase of two-part is going to be introduced into this year's budget, which is going to deal with retrenchment. But when we get out the budget and we've actually had time to work through it, we'll actually send out something to our membership to actually let them know when. And I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Thanks. Geraldine.
Carry on, Wayne. Carry on.
No, I haven't had a look at any of the Q&As yet, but we'll maybe work through our session and then get back to that at the end.
Yeah, that's fine. I wanted to, Wayne, if we perhaps just ask Nancy one or two questions at this point. Nance, I'll kick off with your last statement. Do we have any indication the second phase of two-pot that you mentioned we'll see or hear about when the budget speech comes out? Do we have any indication as to the effective date of phase 2 at this point?
So, Geraldine, I mean, the policy procedure or the principles around procedure for legislation is that the minister actually announces it in the budget, and then in that year's tax bill, it actually is introduced into the legislation with an effective date of the start of the next tax year. So if we see the bills now in July, because that will be the 2025 tax bills, then the chances are that the effective date will probably be 1 March next year. But, often in legislation, you could have different implementation dates. The good thing is that we would have time to consult, and they have to take us through the consultation process before they actually can finalize that legislation. Because if the intention is to pay part, for funds to pay installments or 12 monthly payments, like what we've seen before as a proposal, there will be a lot of consultation needing to happen, particularly because some funds are not able to do that. So I think it'll be announced. I think it'll just be in this year's tax bill, hopefully with an effective date 1 March next year.
Okay, thanks, Nancy. Okay, Wayne, I think I did have a few other questions, but I'm just aware of time, and then maybe I can pose that to Nance after the session, when there's still time. So we'll now kick off with a very important piece of legislation that is coming into effect 1 June this year. So I am fairly certain that everyone is, or hopefully is, aware at this stage that the FSCA published a paper called the Joint Communication 2 of 2024 on cybersecurity and cyber resilience on the 16th of May 2024. And this is going to have a lot of impact on our industry. And I don't think I need to tell anyone about cybersecurity and the potential threat that holds to financial institutions and industries such as ours. So what the joint standard does is it sets out the requirements for sound practices and processes as it relates to cybersecurity and to cyber resilience for financial institutions. And if one look at the paper, you see that financial institutions then include, for the purposes of our discussion, we will focus today on retirement funds and retirement fund administrators. But obviously financial institutions, there's a long list of institutions that's included in that. And it is important that these institutions, and especially retirement funds, are aware of this piece of legislation that is going to kick in. So it's enforced by the Prudential Authority and the Financial Sector Conduct Authority, hence the name Joint Communication. And it outlines the mandatory cybersecurity governance for pension funds. And it, as I said, it then applies to pension funds, administrators, but also importantly, third-party service providers. So, which I'll talk about a little bit later on. And it then brings into focus proactive threat management, detection, response, and recovery as it then relates to cybersecurity and the resilience for institutions thereof. And it therefore deals with two areas. There's prevention, and then there is the how one deals with it should there be an actual incident. Or the resilience. If you just hop back there, Wayne. Sorry. There we go. No. Yeah. So the prevention and the resilience. So the prevention then deals with what you put into place to actually try and prevent such a cyber incident, and the resilience will then deal with it should such an incident occur, how and what the fund should be able to do. If we can now move on, thanks, Wayne. So key security functions when we talk about cybersecurity is really that the slide sums it up nicely. It's the identification, protection, detection, response, and recovery. And this is really what the joint standard talks about, and what is expected under each of these key functions. So identification, here we're talking about mapping critical assets and potential vulnerabilities, which what we can really call our cyber footprint. So if we start thinking about the life of a fund, we can, what one would need to do really to put this in place is you need to map out the flow of your data and your money in the life of a fund. And that would start with running from the employer. If the employer is uploading data through a web portal or sending information to the fund or the fund's administrator via email, what does the administrator do with it from there? It goes onto an administration platform. From there, data could be sent out to risk providers, asset managers, auditors. You need to map out the entire flow of the data in order to actually move forward from that point. And then protection deals with implementing robust security measures such as access control, your password policy that you have got for your fund or your administrator, firewalls, encryptions, and so forth that you put in place to protect your data from unauthorized access. Detection, you need to have measures in place that whereby there's continuous monitoring and anomaly detection so that you can then put something in place for that or prevent something. Responses, then we start moving onto the resilience side of it, rapid incident management and regulatory notification, and ensuring business continuity through backup facilities, disaster recovery plans, and so forth. In the event that an incident has occurred, what will the fund do in such an event? If we can then move on to the next slide, Wayne. We now talking about the next two of our list, and that is identification and protection. So the fund needs to identify its critical systems. And again, that goes hand in hand with the mapping that I spoke about earlier on. Once you've mapped out the flow of your data, it becomes a lot easier in the next step to actually identify the critical systems, records, and it then enables you to start identifying and assessing the actual risk exposure that you have in each of those areas in your flow chart, I will call it for now. You are then able to implement access controls or mitigate the unauthorized access to each of those areas through access controls, like I said earlier on, password policies, how often are passwords changed, is it forced changes, and so forth. And then also multi-factor authentication, OTPs for members logging into a web portal, OTPs or multi-factor authentication for employers that's allowed to access portals and so forth, and then obviously encryption and firewalls. And then needs to conduct regular cyber security risk assessments. You test and you interrogate your processes and prevention methods that you have got in place. And very importantly, train employees and board members on cybersecurity best practices. We know that 60% of cyber incidents that take place is from within an organization, and 75% is accidental, which occurs due to human error, staff members clicking on phishing emails and spam emails, or often these days, I'm sure, as with everyone else, you might get 500 emails a day from your bank, but not everyone actually checks the email address. Is it a valid email address, where it comes from? And people start opening these documents. We can move to the next slide. Thanks, Wayne. So detection and response. So again, deploy continuous monitoring and automated threat detection systems. We know there's a host of these virus protection, spam protection software available, and one needs to make sure that you have got adequate facilities such as that attached to your system and within your system. And then establish fraud detection and penetration testing mechanisms. Again, you interrogate your system, you interrogate the ease with which unauthorized access can be obtained to your data. And then, very importantly, implement incident response plans for swift containment and mitigation. So this is obviously hugely important, because we know we've seen all in the news, especially in the last 2 years, the cyber incidents that has occurred has exponentially increased. And we have also seen in the news that in some of those instances, some of the affected parties, I'm thinking of one that took place last year, the recovery time for them to get systems back up to date was some weeks. And we're talking about big institutions here. So it is absolutely critical that one have got a very comprehensive plan in place, that should an incident occur and your systems come to a standstill, what kind of plan are they in place? What is the first step to take in that plan? Who are the responsible parties in executing that plan? Who's going to be overseeing the plan? And then ensure regulatory breach reporting, which we can see is referenced in the conduct, in the joint communication, and how the breach reporting needs to actually take place. We can move to the next slide. Thanks, Wayne. There we go. So we recovery and business continuity. I touched on that in the previous slide. Also, disaster recovery and business continuity plans. These have recovery and business continuity plans have been a requirement for service providers or administrators for some time, but we're now talking about the fact that the fund must also have this and deal with this in these cyber protection and resilience policies that it needs to put into place. The data must be secure, off-site backups of critical data is required, post-incidents analysis and cybersecurity audits, and then financial risk mitigation measures that must be put into place or enhanced. If we can move to the next slide. Thank you, Wayne. So when we now start looking at the more practical side for funds, and we say governance, compliance, and contracting, it is important to understand that this risk management framework of a fund now needs to bring into its fold the cybersecurity and resilience that is required. So when one looks at what the trustees, where the role of the trustees come in, we know the trustees is really because the communication talks about the responsibilities of the governing body, and we know the governing body of a fund is the trustees, and the trustees, in this case, when we talk about a fund, must then oversee the cyber security governance and risk management. And very importantly, ensure that third-party providers also comply with the cybersecurity requirements. And again, as I mentioned earlier on, if one starts by mapping out the data flow of a fund and where it branch out to different providers, one now starts identifying all these service providers that must provide the fund with comfort and I would say demonstrate their ability that they actually also comply with the cybersecurity requirements. And then, of course, regular board reviews of cybersecurity policies. I believe these would need to be reviewed on at least an annual basis, and then conduct periodic cybersecurity and Wayne went a bit fast there. Thanks, Wayne. No, we back. I think it was, yeah. Conduct periodic cybersecurity performance assessments and then risk management tools. So if we look at best practices and strategic recommendations, adopt a zero trust architecture for strict access control. That is critical because we know that I was talking to someone the other day about the cybersecurity, and we know there are, you can even call them, the word was used, organizations that are these cybersecurity hackers. And they consist of departments. There's staff that's been trained how to do this. There's staff that's been trained on how to infiltrate. There's staff being trained on, as one puts one measure in place to mitigate against it, they continuously try and find new loopholes to deal with it. So enhance employee training on social engineering and phishing attacks. Increase your cybersecurity budgets to improve defenses, leverage on artificial intelligence-driven analytics for proactive cyber risk management, and then foster industry collaboration to share threat intelligence. I believe that is going to become very important for us as an industry. I think, was that my last slide, Wayne? Oh, there we go. Conclusion and the next steps. Cyber resilience is a fundamental requirement. It is not an option. Any financial institution that don't have some form in place already is lacking. And we can see that the joint communication, again, it's not an optional. It has to be done, and each fund is expected to put a compliance framework in place as far as this is concerned, put into place your strategy, plan it, implement it, and so forth. And this all needs to be done by the 1st of June. Proactive measures are key to reducing financial and reputational risks, and trustees and fund administrators must drive the cybersecurity initiatives forward. This is a huge piece of legislation that has come in, or a regulatory requirement, let me call it that, and there is some work involved. So I would highly suggest that funds and boards and administrators get cracking on this if they have not already, to do so urgently. So as I said at the outset of our session today, the purpose of today is really that it's an overview and update session. The session on this joint communication is certainly not intended as an educational session, but it's just really an update and an overview of what this joint communication is covering. Thanks, Wayne. That's all from me at this point.
Thank you, Geraldine. Going to move on now, hopefully, everyone can hear me. Yeah, I had to switch off my very sensitive mouse. Just a quick one on the Kofi bill. So there are two other sections. I'm not going to cover it in detail. It's more a reminder for those of you who may be new or just need a reminder. One of the other big things that we expect to see in 2025, depending on where we are with the process, is the Kofi bill being submitted to to Parliament. Sorry, no, did I say so? Kofi is Conduct of Financial Institutions Bill. For those who don't know, so again, and the slides will be available later, so you can refer to them. Why we're mentioning this is that it is going to have a fundamental impact on the regulatory environment, and I'm not going to go into detail of what it is. However, touching on the principles around Kofi, which I think many of you are familiar with, those would be listed there. I don't want to take away time from our other speakers. The big issue here is a lot of consultation has taken place. We haven't seen the final version of the bill that's going to be submitted to National Treasury, and that will obviously make give us the detail that we need to look at when dealing with what preparations are needed. So what do I do have in the presentation are some of the things we think that you need to be thinking of already, be aware of. One of the big things would be around licensing. So all financial institutions, including the pension funds, would need, or retirement funds would need to be relicensed, and there might be some conditions around that licensing. There will definitely be more details around fit and proper. So the one thing we've already gotten used to is the fact that trustees have to complete the trustee toolkit. There might be some additional requirements. There might be additional requirements for confirmation of independence of principal officers. And again, enhanced member communication, and also important financial inclusion aspect of the bill would be the mechanisms to encourage transformation and a more inclusive financial sector. Not going to go into too much of this. Again, you can read it at your leisure, and if you have any questions, and obviously once we've got the final bill, we'll be able to give you more information on that. As the point I wanted to get to was this: the strategic adaptations for compliance to Kofi. Things that we should start working on is looking at the governance structures, being aware of how those are structured, so that we can then adapt and change where needed to comply with Kofi, having a good understanding. Again, strengthening risk, and I think that's been spoken about earlier on, cybersecurity being one of the prime examples of that. Then the development of transformation strategies. I know for insurance companies, for example, transformation strategies are considered as part of the licensing requirements. This may be something that we'll see for other financial institutions, including pension funds, going forward. And then I think many of us have already built the stakeholder engagement much more than it was maybe 2 years ago prior to pot. So that's ongoing, something we need to really focus on. I think the big thing is that we need to be aware that Kofi's coming. We need to be aware that there are definitely going to be things we need to do to adhere to what the law is now going to say, and really also about how this law is a tool for us to also think about the operations of the organizations we manage or involved with, and those we engage with. And I think, again, with all these regulatory activities, the aim is to build trust and to make sure that pension funds can deliver on what it is that they promise to do. And then the final section, just a quick update. There was some reporting around something called the Omni CBR, which has been around for a while. Again, you can read it in the slides. You'll see pension funds or retirement funds and retirement fund administrators are definitely included in this reporting. We have engaged as IRFA with the authority on this on several occasions. There is talk about refining it further. One of the big concerns that were raised, or not concerns, issues that were brought to light, is that there might be multiple organizations reporting on the same type of, or the same data, exactly the same data, and how to streamline that. The full rollout has been pushed out to 2026. It might be pushed out further. Just again, something that everybody in the ecosystem needs to be aware of. And again, as soon as there's finality on that, we'll definitely be reaching out to everyone and sharing what we have learned. Again, I'm not going to go into too much of the detail there, but again, it's going to be mandatory reporting, a bit like the Regulation 20, not a bit, like Regulation 28 reporting is mandatory, with similar functions in the background to ensure that the regulator can be proactive when dealing with funds and identifying any risks. We will keep you updated on this one. Again, you can read this. So these principles are set out when you read through the document. And if there are any questions, please ask them either today or later, and you can email us, and we'll draft a response. Again, I think it's something, it's a wait and see, and we will then deal with it when it's ready for us to deal with. I need to hand over to Amanda. I see there are 2 raised hands. I can't access that right at the moment. I don't know if any of the other presenters can see who that is. Thank you. Over to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Wayne. I have answered 2 questions in the Q&A, and perhaps I saw another person's hand go down. They might be willing to add their question under the Q&A. I think that might be easier. I'll just go through my section, and I just want to touch on what Wayne as well as Geraldine just spoke about just now, and just indicate what we're witnessing is quite a powerful regulatory intersection between these different legislations that are now being prioritized or re-emphasized by the regulator. And the PA, which is Regulation 28, the COFI bill, as well as the FSTC scorecard. And as you can see from what Wayne presented, the COFI bill significantly is starting to broaden the financial regulation by mandating transparency and reporting on transformation progress. It's also encouraging diverse ownership structures, and this is now starting to align pension fund investments with broader socioeconomic objectives. Next slide, Wayne. This intersection is starting to represent a fundamental shift towards institutionalizing ethical and sustainable investment practices across the sector. And the critical thing to understand here is that while these may appear as separate regulatory initiatives, they actually converging around 2 specific clauses in Regulation 28 that are now receiving more heightened scrutiny from the FSCA. If you go to the next slide, we can start examining what these 2 clauses are and their immediate implications. Okay, the first clause, you can see that there's a renewed emphasis on the mandate around funds incorporating broad-based Black economic empowerment considerations when they are engaging with service providers. This directly embeds transformation into institutional procurement practices and structures. And if you look at the second regulation, it requires that boards of funds consider environmental, social, and governance factors before investing in any asset. These are actually not new regulations, but it's our view that these recent FSCA actions indicate that these clauses are on the radar of compliance, and funds should pay closer attention to how they meet regulatory requirements that are informed by these two regulations. Next slide, Wayne. So as you are, if you go to the next slide, this is for reading purposes. I think you skipped a slide, Wayne. Go back one. Yes, this one. As you may fully be aware, and it also might have been quite unexpected, a lot of funds would have received, well, all funds should have received the letter, this letter in January that is requesting a self-assessment. And it's mandatory, and the assessment must be completed by Monday, which is March the 3rd. And I'd like to emphasize that it isn't just a routine request. As I indicated, it was already in the legislation, but now from this, we know that it carries a non-compliance penalty of 1,000 rands per day under the Financial Sector Regulation Act. If we look at the questions in the letter closely, we note that the assessment examines your fund's procurement policies, if there's diversity in service provider selection, and what your transformation reporting mechanisms are. And with the deadline just days away, this represents an immediate compliance priority for many funds. And I will suggest that what you must do post that activity being concluded. Can move from the slide, Wayne. If we turn to the second regulatory clause under Regulation 28, which is ESG implementation, based on the clause of ESG integration. Most recently, there was an FSCA industry survey which identified several challenges that funds are facing. These include inconsistent definitions of sustainable investments, of what constitutes sustainable investments across the industry, and insufficient pipeline of investments that satisfy both ESG credentials and financial return requirements, and limited influence for pools and retail funds over ESG mandates. I know there's been a lot of noise in other jurisdictions about ESG, and you will remember that much of the noise was in our ears for a few years now, and there's increased political interference in those jurisdictions on some of these policies. But we have not seen a similar local response, so we are presuming it is transformation and ESG business as usual in South Africa. So back to the Sustainability Progress Survey. The survey also highlighted the delicate balance between climate goals and ensuring a just transition, particularly regarding coal-related or fossil fuel-related assets. And over 50% of funds had indicated a willingness to reduce exposure to coal. And this is just on paper, but as you may well know, that a lot can be said from a survey's responses, but not necessarily be evidenced in the practical implementation of it. Next slide, Wayne. And as a reminder that, ESG integration is not a nice to have. The survey did say that 99% of funds have an integrated IPS, but little active ownership of these strategies. As I mentioned, much can be said on paper, but not much being done. So again, I'd like to reiterate that the guidance notice is not merely advisory, as it provides specific interpretation of how funds should comply with Regulation 28's principles, and the FSCA is increasingly treating these as mandatory requirements. Next slide. cognizant of time. Just to summarize, it's our suggestion that funds begin to immediately respond to the March 3rd deadline letter, which relates to transformation. Begin reviewing your IPS for ESG and transformation alignment. Also ensure that your investment manager mandates reflect fund policies. And beyond compliance, it is our recommendation that more specific and focused training be conducted, firstly on the joint standard that Geraldine presented. There are a number of questions that related specifically to how trustees can implement that, and then also using the Rio Guide as a way of integrating practically ESG into your IPS. I think I'll end there, Wayne. We barely have time to go further. Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. I'm not sure if Wayne wanted to say something there, but that was really informative. And I think really to sum up, like Amanda says, there were definitely indication that certain very important issues are starting to come to the forefront, and it is important that we are aware of it. And I suppose the first sentence here really sums it up. Stay informed and engaged as far as regulatory changes in 2024 and 2025 are concerned, as these will continue to shape the retirement sector. And it's important that we keep up to date with these. You know, a bit of forewarning is always better than working backwards. And ensure compliance and readiness. The implementation of the two-part retirement system, I think, was a huge learning curve for us as an industry in understanding how perhaps one could have dealt with it better. And I think preparedness and engagement is really what comes out there. So we can see the cybersecurity standards, the COFI bill, Wayne touched on, all requires proactive planning. These are not things that can be put in place overnight. And it's important that we start working on these frameworks as quickly as possible. And then strengthen governance and risk management. Trustees and administrators must prioritize cyber resilience, transparency, and member protection to safeguard funds. You know, as an industry, we're looking after something like 4.6 trillion rand. We're really an industry that is a lovely, attractive target for some of these cyber culprits out there, and it's imperative that we strengthen our governance and risk management policies in this regard. And then, very important, drive transformation and sustainability. I mean, that's what Amanda just spoke about. You know, I often say it, and I'm sure many people have heard me say, especially for us in South Africa and the African continent, there are far greater risks facing us than just the risk of poor investment return. You know, the ESG and ESG is obviously very important, but for us as a continent, the S is hugely important. Our huge unemployment rates, our social struggles that we've got in this country. But really what it speaks to for me, and listening to Amanda also, I think the warning is there. Trustees need to equip themselves to understand Regulation 28. It is, at first glance, it might not seem that complex, but Regulation 28 is complex. It entails a lot of different aspects, and trustees have to start understanding Regulation 28 and not just rely on the providers as far as that's concerned. And then prepare for reporting and oversight. Our Omni CBR is big, hey? It is huge, guys, and we need to start preparing for it now in order to avoid another two-pot issue. And when I say that, I'm talking about Omni CBR is extensive. Systems need to be developed in order to cater for that. And then call for action. The IRFA will continue to provide support and insights on these key topics. As I said, we'll have more of these information sessions or update sessions if we want to call it that. And then, of course, the IRFA is always there for you guys to contact us. But I am cognizant that we've run out of time, so I will finish up. There is, as usual, a lot more that I can say, and I'm sure so also would Amanda, Nancy, and Wayne like to say a bit more. But thank you very much for joining our session. We do appreciate it, and we appreciate you taking your valuable time to join us and to listen to us. And I'll just close off by reminding everyone that the annual IRFA conference will be held the 24th to the 26th of August in Cape Town, and under the theme of the conference, Building Resilience, Leading Change for Lasting and Positive Impact. And thank you very much.